we're going to be talking about the Tao Te Ching and Taoism today. But before we get into it, we really have to deal with the spelling and the pronunciations. If you've ever seen it written, as in on the title of this book, it looks like Tao Te Ching. And that's how it's spelled. And if you're my age or older, you may remember that there's always been this strange methodology of pronouncing Chinese words totally differently from the way the Chinese actually pronounce them. So you may have grown up remembering the city of Peking. How many of you remember Peking? You know, you youngsters, that's Beijing. But it never used to be Beijing. And then finally, we got over our arrogance and decided we'd try to pronounce things the way they were actually said. And we still do this in other parts of the world. We lived in Germany for 3 years, except the Germans don't call it Germany, they call it Deutschland. And they don't call each other Germans, they call each other Deutschers, because that's how they say it. But heaven forbid we would pronounce their country the way they pronounce it. So when you deal with Taoism, some people will say Taoism. And there's still a little bit of a debate going on about how you spell it and how you say it. So I'm going to go with Taoism and Tao Te Ching as opposed to Tao Te Ching. But I may mess up because sometimes the way things are written and sometimes the way I've heard things on audio and YouTube videos that I've watched preparing for this, it's very easy to get tripped up. So forgive me if I do that. I'll try to be consistent. Now this all started when Jancy was actually reading this book, and she said, "Here, read the first chapter in here. This is pretty good." So I read it, and the chapters are very short. 1, 2, maybe 3 pages at most. And I read that and I thought, hey, that's pretty neat. She said, maybe you could do something with that. And I said, yeah, I probably could. So, foolish me, of course. I'm not simply going to go over one chapter out of another religion's holy book or philosophy's major text. I have to do a little background research. And when you're doing a little background research on something you know very little about, it's amazing how much time it actually takes. So I've had a lot of time this week dealing with various views of this. And with any religion, there are variations. There is not just one form of Taoism. One of the major distinctions is that you have what is called religious Taoism, and you have philosophical Taoism. Now, the religious Taoism, I haven't even gotten into except at the most superficial level. It incorporates Chinese folk religions. It has a heavy emphasis on reincarnation, on achieving immortality, on life extension through all sorts of practices, be it meditation, the food you eat, even proper techniques of how you live your life in almost every respect. And then theoretically, although that's not the goal, you could extend your life dramatically and theoretically live forever in this world, in this body. However, the main goal is immortality in another life, in another body. I'm not going to be talking much about that. It's extremely extensive, and if you were interested in it, there's a wealth of information out there. But I'm going to be focusing more on philosophic Taoism today. And so there's still religious elements. But if you were going to, say, go to a Taoist temple, and there's even a couple in the United States, not a lot, but I did a little research to see if you wanted to actually go and see this in action. There's mostly out west or a little bit up in New England, but not nearly as widespread, say, as Buddhism would be in the West. This is still really quite limited in the U.S., but there are examples of it out there of the religious Taoism. And, go check that out if that interests you. But what I want to do today is take a look first at some of the background, and then we're going to look at that one chapter that I talked about that Jancy pointed out to me and led to this analysis of Taoism. The Tao Te Ching is a classic Chinese text. It was written about 600 BC. So to put this in perspective, that's 200 years before the Buddha, 600 years before Jesus. So this is a very ancient way of looking at things, whether you call it a religion or a philosophy. It is one of 2 foundational texts for Taoism. The other is the Zhuangzi, which I've done no research on and can't answer any questions about it, so don't ask me during talkback. I don't know. But the Tao Te Ching was allegedly written by Lao Tzu, and some people pronounce it Lao Tzu. There's a disagreements on the pronunciations of almost every word I'm going to use today. I'm going to stick with Lao Tzu, and it literally means old master. So the question arises, is this a title of a position, or is it the name of an actual person? Now the legend goes that Lao Tzu worked in the government in China, and one day, because he was an archivist, so he was well-read and literate and all that, he was a poet and a philosopher, and supposedly he just got fed up with the bureaucracy, with the civil service, if you will, and decided, I've had it, I'm leaving. And as he's marching out of the city and going through the gate, a guard who respected him said, please, don't just leave. You've got to write this all down first. Write down your wisdom before you depart and leave us. And so that is the legend of how the Tao Te Ching was written, that he actually did sit down and take the time to write this out. Now, the Tao Te Ching is very short. If you compare this to other scriptures, for instance, this small book that I'm holding, everything in this last section is just notes. So it actually consists of 81 chapters. Each of these may be 1 or 2 pages, and you could read all of this pretty quickly, because once you get rid of all the intro and stuff, that's your holy scripture right there. Compare that to the Bible or the Quran or Buddhist texts or anything else. This is very short. So he might have spent a few days just writing this down and then departed. In any case, this is one of the foundational texts for what we call Taoism today. As Taoism spread, the story of Lao Tzu became more and more exalted. And he went from being a mere human to actually being a god. And he was a god who was worshipped because he revealed the Tao to humanity. And I'll get into what the Tao is in a minute. But there was even a religious group formed called the Way of the Celestial Master. This was the first Taoist religious sect, and it became so powerful that they actually, within China, set up a separate, independent, theocratic state based on Taoism and the worship of Lao Tzu. So that's pretty powerful. Now, we don't hear so much about him today. As religious leaders go, he's somewhat down there on the list of people that we first think of when we say name religious leaders. But he actually had a huge impact in China. So that's the history. Now, there are 3 very important concepts you have to grasp before I even go over a chapter. The first one is the Tao itself. And again, it's spelled T-A-O oftentimes. Sometimes you'll see a D-A-O. We're going to pronounce it Tao here. And in the simplest terms, the Tao is the source of all things. Now immediately you think, well, that's God. Is the Tao God? Well, the Tao is not personal. There is no personal relationship between the Tao and you. The Tao is not a separate entity separate from the universe. So it's not, in that sense, a God, as various theocratic or theologies would teach God in the West. So, the Tao is a force almost, like Star Wars, the Force. It doesn't let you do magical abilities, but it infuses everything. It gives a rising to everything. It is the cause of everything. Now, you're going to find that as I talk about these things, sometimes these concepts are hard to grasp. If any of you have sat through any of my Zen lessons, same idea. Lots of things that seem like a paradox, and that's okay. The idea is to break your mind out of Western concrete ways of thinking and think in different ways entirely. And you're going to have to do that for the Tao to make any sense. So the Tao is indescribable by words. I'm trying to describe it by words and I'm failing. But the Tao is something that you will experience individually. And this, you're going to find a lot of parallels between this and some forms of Buddhism, because some Buddhist sects teach that enlightenment or awakening is also indescribable by words and achieved individually. It's an experience you have that you can't really fully describe. Well, it's not surprising because Taoism heavily influenced various forms of Buddhism, and I'll get to that in a little bit. But the fact that the two sound alike is not a coincidence. So this idea that the Tao encompasses everything and is yet immanent within ourselves is key. You have to understand that to understand anything else that's written about Taoism. Chinese Chan Buddhism was heavily influenced by Taoism, and from this Chinese Chan Buddhism flowed Japanese Zen Buddhism, Korean Buddhism, Vietnamese Buddhism. It all flowed out of China, and all of this was heavily influenced and flavored by Taoism. Buddhism is very different in different parts of the world. So the Zen branch directly traces many of its teachings to Taoism. So it is the father of the Zen idea. The goal in Taoism is to achieve harmony with the flow of nature. And that's another way of describing the Tao itself. It is the flow of everything. And so you want to become in tune to this. You want to live harmoniously with the way the universe functions and flows. You don't want to spend your life fighting against this flow. Again, describing the flow to you in words, I can't do it. I'm not an expert on this, and allegedly you wouldn't be able to do it even if you were an expert. But you're trying to live in harmony with the universe. And if you do this, you achieve Wu Wei. Some people pronounce it Wu Wei, but the majority go with Wu Wei. And the way you get Wu Wei is through both moral action in your lives, living ethically, kindly, seeking not to cause suffering, and also through meditation. So again, you're seeing this influence going into Buddhist ideas. So this second concept, Wu Wei, is also critical. Wu Wei is often called non-doing or actionless action. So talk about your paradoxes. I can see people rubbing their head and going, oh, I got a headache. Non-doing or actionless action. What in the world does that mean? Wu Wei is the concept of doing things effectively, but without huge effort. So here's a story to help illustrate this point. Ancient flood stories are found all over the world. You know, we know the story of Noah's Ark, that the entire world is flooded and Noah has to build an ark to save the animals and some people. China has a similar story, except it's just China that gets flooded. And so there were two courses of action that leaders took to try to prevent future floods like this. One effort was to build gigantic dams everywhere to keep the water out. Huge amount of effort involved to do that. But a second plan was, instead of building all these giant monstrous dams and walls to have all this water pressing in against these barricades threatening to break through, another way to avoid these problems would be to dig ditches and gullies, artificial rivers, if you will, to cause the water to flow through and out of China. Rather than working against the flow of nature by building dams, you go with the flow of nature, with the force of the water, with gravity, and build channels to get the water out. That's a good example of thinking along these lines, of going with the flow instead of against it. That would be an example of Wu Wei. Martial arts often emphasize this, where you use the force of your opponent against them. Instead of just challenging them head on, you take their force and you flip them over, or whatever the moves are. It's the idea of the minimal amount of effort you need to use in order to achieve the desired result by taking advantage of natural flow of what's going on in the universe. If someone is charging at you, you have all that momentum built up. You can use that momentum by moving out of the way and flipping your opponent, or you can go head on into that opponent. That's going to hurt a lot more. And it might be effective, but it takes a lot more force, and it's probably going to do you more harm. So that would be an idea of effortless action, being used the existing force to your benefit as opposed to simply challenging it head on. Water is usually the natural thing that is used to describe Wu Wei. In fact, the priests of Taoist priests, wear blue robes. Blue representing water, because water, although extremely powerful, also follows the natural channels. So water conforms to whatever container it's poured into. Water follows the contours of the land. And yet, Large amounts of water can be extremely powerful. So water becomes a great example of Wu Wei. And blue is the, if you will, holy color of the priest to represent water and the desire to achieve Wu Wei. So if you can completely integrate your body and your mind in a kinetic flow with the Tao, the force that runs everything in the universe, then you've achieved Wu Wei. A good way to sum this up might be an example that a lot of you have been through. First of all, when you act, you want to act with honesty and integrity. In fact, integrity or virtue becomes such an important element that that's going to be the third point I'm about to cover. But you act with this honesty and integrity without an absolute expectation of a certain result. So, many of you have taken your turn up here, and you give a talk or a sermon, whichever you prefer to call it. And for many of you, this is a fairly new thing. You've never spoken in a church before, but you understand that the way we function as a small congregation is everyone takes their turn. And I've talked to more than a few who've been a little bit nervous about getting up here for the first time. And even those who've done it a couple times, still a little bit stressful when you come up here the next time. Think about this the next time you're preparing a talk. You prepare the talk in the best way you can. You give an honest effort. You prepare the talk with integrity, with virtue. You're not seeking to deceive anyone. You're seeking to be open and honest and present something you consider to be valuable. You do not, these are the things you want to try to avoid, do not be disappointed if when you stand up here there's only 20 people or 15 people out here. It's not personal. Sometimes that happens. Sometimes you get a low turnout. Don't get up here and go, oh, people saw I'm speaking and they didn't come. Because I assure you, there's been some days where I stand up here and there's not many people. And you just press on. That's not the point. So you don't have the expectation of a large turnout. You don't have the expectation that people are going to come up afterwards and tell you what a great job you did. They might. They often do. But you don't have that expectation. You don't expect anyone to have a life-altering experience based on what you've said. Okay? That's not why you're up here. What you are doing is sharing. Prepare with a good, honest effort. Present it the same way, whether there's 20 or 60 people sitting here. And if you do this, be satisfied. You've done what you can do. You are in tune with the Tao. That is Wu Wei. Don't come up here and saying, if 50 people don't show up, I failed. If 5 people don't come up and tell me I did a great job, I failed. If someone doesn't tell me I have made a change in their life, I have failed. If you do these things, you are fighting against the flow of the Tao. I don't know if that helps or not, but I thought that might be Wu Wei, go with the flow of the universe. Going with the flow of a room full of yu-yus is like riding the rapids. You just hang on for dear life and hope you're dry when it's over. So the third critical concept, okay, we've done the Tao, done Wu Wei. The third one comes also from the title. The first, by the way, the Tao Te Ching, Tao, Day, or Duh, as some pronounce it. Duh, as one guy said on a YouTube video, unfortunate word to use for something so important. If you achieve a state of Wu Wei, you acquire Duh. You can't actively pursue it. You shouldn't actively pursue it. It comes after much cultivation over much time. The Tao guides you, the universe, the flow of everything, guides you. Just as in Zen Buddhism, and you don't pursue enlightenment or awakening, in Taoism, you don't pursue Duh. There are, of course, different interpretations of what Duh is, but they're all fairly close. So here's a couple. One view is that Duh is somewhat like a charismatic power that you get. Not that you turn into a super charming and magnetically attractive person, but because of the way you live, because of the stands you take, you do attract followers, or at least people who want to be around you. And you don't have to force this, you don't have to coerce. People want to follow you, and it allows you to function smoothly in social situations, political situations, whatever it may be. It's a key to success, if you will. So people who are trying to turn Taoism into a self-help project will sort of emphasize this way of looking at it. But the problem is, you do not seek to acquire Da. It comes after much cultivation by the practice of Wu Wei. So another interpretation, which is probably a better one, not that it's so much a charismatic power, but that it is a virtue or integrity. It is an aspect of your life, an inner power, integrity, or virtue. These traits attract people, so it's not that much different from the idea of a charismatic power, but what's causing you to be a leader, or to be one that others would want to be around or to follow, is that you act with integrity and virtue. This is Da. You cannot strive after Da. You can only live in a way to cultivate it. And you live in this way by seeking the Tao, seeking to understand the flow of everything, of the universe, and tend to achieve that state of Wu Wei, where you're not constantly fighting against the forces, but going with them. So here's a summation of different religions in Asia and how they view Da. And they might use different words. In Buddhism, it can be merit, virtuous deeds, or just simply a high standard of quality within the way you live. Confucianism defines it more as a social virtue or morality that helps to support the greater good. Confucianism is all about your role in society and helping society to stay strong. And then, of course, in Taoism, it's a personal virtue and inner power, integrity. So when we look at the Tao Te Ching, we see these important concepts, as I said, in the title of the collection of chapters. The Tao is the way of the universe. Da is integrity. And Jing simply means great book or classic. So the title of this book means the great book of the way and integrity. A more poetic translation could be the classic of the virtuous way. And there are other ways to interpret it. Those are just a couple. And here's a few sayings that go along with Taoism. Some of these you've probably heard. If not, they're good ones to dwell on. And some of these will make you hold your head and go, headache. One of the classics from Lao Tzu is, the Tao that can be spoken is not the eternal Tao. And that refers to the fact that words are not adequate to describe the Tao. Remember that I said Wu Wei is referred to as non-doing or actionless action. That's a great paradox that's often used to describe this. Here's a couple more, and then we'll get into chapter 1. Those who know do not speak. Those who speak do not know. And this is in reference to the Tao, of course, but it doesn't mean no one's ever supposed to say anything. But when you start saying that you know the ultimate truth, you don't. Anyone who does, doesn't. And finally, when you are content to be simply yourself and don't compare or compete, everyone will respect you. You may not agree with it, but I like the idea. When you are content to be simply yourself and don't compare or compete, everyone will respect you. Now, the chapter that I'm going to look at, and this is another strange thing about Taoism, or about the Tao Te Ching, I should say, is that there was a order to the verses, or the chapters. And then, probably about 40, 50 years ago, they found a much older manuscript in which the chapters were totally different. The order was reversed almost. The last section came first. So, for this one, it's numbered chapter 1, but in most of the older traditional ones, it's chapter 38. So if you wanted to look this up afterwards, you're either going to have to go, because if you go online and look, as I did, and I looked at different versions and different translations, and the translations, I will add, are wildly different. People love to go out and translate this themselves because it's so short. So they'll give their translation really becomes a commentary on how they understand it. So you can go out and read this same chapter and it will be half the length by another translator. It was amazing to me to look at it. He takes multiple lines and condenses them into a single line. It's really more of a commentary. But if you go out and look at it, most of the ones online will call this chapter 38. This particular book insists on reordering it based on the older manuscript. So here we go. This is about integrity, or duh. The person of superior integrity, and you can think virtue every time I say integrity if you like that better. The person of superior integrity does not insist upon his integrity. For this reason, he has integrity. And I apologize for the, once again, sexist language, but he is what's used. You can put she in there. The person of inferior integrity never loses sight of his integrity. For this reason, he lacks integrity. Now think about that. If you are of superior integrity, you don't insist upon it. And what that means is you don't go telling other people how much integrity you have. No, really! I'm telling you the truth. If you have to keep telling someone you're telling them the truth, odds are you've been caught in a lie in the past. The person of superior integrity never needs to point out their integrity, and therefore they have it. On the other hand, those who don't have integrity are pointing it out all the time, and for that reason they lack it. The person of superior integrity takes no action. There's your wu wei. The person of superior integrity takes no action, nor has he a purpose for acting. The person of superior humaneness takes action, but has no purpose for acting. Now there's an order here, and I'm going to come back. So we're going from integrity to humaneness. The person of superior righteousness takes action and has a purpose for acting. The person of superior etiquette, which can be translated ritual or legalism, the person of superior etiquette takes action, but others do not respond to him, whereupon he rolls up his sleeves and coerces them. So, you start with the person of superior integrity, of superior duh. They take no action and have no purpose for acting because it all comes naturally. It's not a conscious effort to be a person of integrity. It is natural, integral to their lives, and flows without thinking. That's the highest level for a person. Now, if you're not quite there, the next highest level, if you will, if you want to order these, the person of superior humaneness, which is a great thing to be humane. They take action. That's different. They take action as opposed to take no action. We're not in wu wei anymore. Now you are perhaps fighting against the flow, but you're doing it for a right reason. You don't have a purpose for acting. You're doing it because you're humane and you care. You might not be doing it the best way, but you are trying to be humane. So that's good. It's not quite the highest level, but it's good. The next step down, the person of superior righteousness. The person of superior righteousness deliberately takes actions and has a purpose for acting. That's essentially a reference to, I order my life based on directives, scriptures, or somebody else's directions perhaps. So you're righteous because now you're doing this external action to show that you're good. So now it's not such a great thing. Righteousness is sort of like the Pharisees in the Bible. They always did the right things outwardly, but their inward motivations were wrong. And so they would put on this great show, and they knew the law inside and out, but their motives were wrong. And finally, you come down to the person of superior etiquette, meaning the person who's just focused on rituals or legalism. Legalism meaning, all I care about is the law, whatever religious law that is, that's all that matters. They take action, but no one responds. No one wants to be around this person. And therefore, they roll up their sleeves and coerce them. This is essentially people like the Taliban, or ISIS, or Christian fundamentalists who would want to establish a theocracy and enforce their views on others. The love is gone, the humaneness is gone, the righteousness is gone, focused only on this legalistic interpretation of life, and when no one bothers to listen to them because they don't want anything to do with it, they use force. So this idea goes back to 600 BC. It's not a new idea. It was going on in China in the time of Lao Tzu. Therefore, when the way is lost, and the way is the Tao, when the way is lost, afterwards comes integrity. Once again, we're going to have this hierarchy of how people move up the chain, if you will, but we're starting at the top and going down. So when the way is lost, that means you had fully grasped the Tao, and that's gone. Afterward comes integrity. Still very important, but not quite the pinnacle. When integrity is lost, afterward comes humaneness. When humaneness is lost, afterwards comes righteousness. When righteousness is lost, afterwards comes etiquette, or that legalistic way of living. So, he concludes, and really this whole thing is about your integrity, and don't be a legalistic pain in the butt, okay? Etiquette is the attenuation or weakening of trustworthiness and the source of disorder. Now think about that. Legalism and ritual is all about following directives. And he says, if this is what's important to you, it is the weakening of trustworthiness and the source of disorder. Foreknowledge, seeking to know the future, seeking to nail down what's going to happen in the future, is but the blossomy ornament of the way, the flower, if you will, but the source of ignorance. For this reason, the great man resides in substance, not in attenuation, not in the weakening. He resides in the fruitful reality. So he's contrasting fruit against flower. He resides in the fruitful reality, not in the blossomy ornament. Therefore, he rejects the one and adopts the other. Seeking the Tao is picking the fruit, living with the fruit. The real purpose of having a garden. Seeking righteousness or legalistic superiority or focusing only on ritual, you've just focused on the flower which you cannot eat. The Tao is the fruit. That's what you must seek. So the rituals, the legalism, trying to nail down the future, these are all false paths. The flowers, they're pretty, they attract you, but it's not what matters. Becoming one with the Tao, having true integrity, comes through Wu Wei. Avoid these flowers that would distract you. Dwell with the things that produce the fruit. So there you have it. Now you're all experts in Taoism. At least I'm sure you're expert enough to ask me questions that I won't know the answer to during our next hour.